The journey begins in silence. Not the silence of inactivity, but the calibrated, scientific stillness of a cold room where crates are sealed, time-stamped, and moved with surgical precision. Inside each crate, a dozen oysters, still alive, still filtering water, still responding to light, pressure, temperature. They are biological time bombs with commercial value that rivals fine jewelry. Some, like the Guillardot from France or the Dyson from Japan, command up to $120 per dozen. And every second of their journey is a race not just against time, but against biology. Oysters are not dead when harvested. They're not inert. They're metabolic systems, still processing oxygen, still shifting internally. The moment they leave the water, they enter a countdown. A temperature deviation of just 2 degrees can alter their biochemistry. A delay of 30 minutes can trigger anaerobic fermentation, an invisible shift from freshness to spoilage. This is why the logistics chain that moves these creatures is not just about cold, it's about control of oxygen, vibration, humidity, and even the angle of their position in flight. We're not talking about seafood anymore. We're talking about living biochemical reactors in a mobile chamber. To fly an oyster across continents is to choreograph a ballet of temperature drops and gas exchanges. Specialized crates, often made from modified polyethylene, don't just cushion the shells. They mimic the tide. These crates use vent-controlled cold packs to reproduce the intertidal thermal rhythm oysters evolved with, keeping them in a state of semi-dormancy without killing them. Sensors track temperature to the decimal. The crates are tested for airflow, condensation, and even rotational force during takeoff. This is not packaging. It's precision engineering, refined to preserve something that's biologically delicate and economically invaluable. It may sound extreme, but the comparison is real. Transporting high-value oysters shares engineering logic with how geologists move core samples from oil drilling operations. In both cases, the internal chemical environment must be preserved intact. Shock absorption is critical. Temperature gradients must be minimized. And vibration is not just a nuisance. It's a variable in the equation of loss. The oyster, in this case, becomes a lens, a fragile mirror that reveals just how sophisticated and invisible modern logistics has become. And so we ask, what happens when a fresh oyster breaks its 2.5 thermal profile for just 30 minutes mid-journey? The shell may arrive uncracked. The box may be on time, but inside, the metabolic chain has already collapsed. The flavor is gone. The freshness is false. The product is lost, not by delay, but by the failure to account for its biology. This isn't just food transport. This is a biochemical equation in motion, a system where cooling, airflow, and silence all mean survival. Because when you fly an oyster, you're not just flying seafood, you're flying something alive, something evolving. And unless your system respects that, it will die long before it lands. At 28,000 feet, the cabin is quiet. Engines hum with controlled force, and temperature-controlled pallets rest motionless in the hold. But inside those sealed containers, something invisible begins to shift. The oxygen doesn't circulate evenly. The oysters, though boxed and cooled, continue to breathe. Respiration doesn't stop with harvest. It only slows. And in a closed system, that slowing process can turn deadly. As oxygen depletes and carbon dioxide accumulates, the metabolic balance tips. Anaerobic respiration begins, and with it, the oyster dies. Not dramatically, but chemically. Most seafood freight systems are designed around time and temperature, 2 variables, 2 metrics. But oysters introduce a third, internal gas composition. This variable, often overlooked, defines whether the product arrives fresh or spoiled. And yet, commercial cargo holds are not designed for oxygen uniformity inside insulated seafood crates. Air layers form. Pockets of stagnation appear. Some oysters receive just enough oxygen to delay decay. Others begin to ferment before the plane lands. And no one can see it, because no one is measuring it. In response to this hidden variable, engineers turn to another field, hydroponics. Specifically, the respiration needs of root systems in sealed plant environments. From that knowledge emerged a new solution: micro-perforated liners. These thin, flexible membranes were first used to manage gas exchange in hydroponic greenhouses. Now, they stabilize the oxygen-carbon dioxide ratio inside seafood crates. By allowing just enough airflow, they delay anaerobic onset for up to 36 hours. Enough to cross oceans, enough to survive delays on tarmacs and loading bays. Enough to keep the oyster breathing but not rotting. And the difference is measurable. Studies comparing traditional vacuum-sealed packaging to micro-perforated liners under identical cold conditions revealed a stark contrast. In crates without airflow, toxin levels, especially domoic acid, rose by 19% within 24 hours. That margin can mean the difference between premium product and rejected shipment, between serving luxury seafood and issuing a public health warning. This isn't theory. In 2021, a high-value shipment of Kumamoto oysters left Hokkaido bound for Dubai. Perfect timing, perfect refrigeration. But when it arrived, it failed an EU standard import test. The oysters, though cold, had begun fermenting mid-flight. Lab results found no bacterial contamination, no delay in delivery. The cause? Loss of oxygen during the air leg of the journey. A $180,000 batch, ruined not by time or temperature, but by the unmeasured absence of air. This is the paradox of shellfish logistics. We build systems that track weight, track temperature, track route. But the oysters don't respond to what we track. They respond to what we ignore. So the real question isn't just how fast or how cold can you ship. The question is, are you measuring the actual environment inside the crate? Are your controls aligned with biology or only with logistics? Because oysters don't die when they arrive. They die in silence, somewhere over the ocean. And unless we understand that silence, we'll keep flying perfect boxes filled with invisible loss. Every flight has its rhythm. Engines pulse. Turbines generate vibrations that ripple through the fuselage. To passengers, it's barely noticeable. But inside a freight hold, even that subtle vibration creates a mechanical environment with lasting biological effects. And when the cargo is alive, like oysters, those vibrations can rewrite the outcome of the entire shipment. Shells that appear intact may already be compromised. The damage isn't visual, it's structural. Microscopic fractures emerge under prolonged oscillation, imperceptible to the human eye, but devastating to the oyster's internal integrity. These microfractures act as silent breaches. They allow microbial ingress, they destabilize osmotic balance. They open the way for spoilage to begin, not days later, but mid-flight. For years, these losses were attributed to temperature, handling, or natural mortality. Only recently did studies begin to map the relationship between engine resonance and shell fatigue. The findings were consistent. Even under ideal refrigeration and gas composition, vibration alone can increase mortality. In response, engineers looked to aerospace food logistics, a sector already familiar with the challenge of protecting fragile cargo during long flights. The solution? Biofoam bedding, initially developed for transporting impact-sensitive produce, like eggs, across high-altitude supply routes. This wasn't just soft padding. It was a form-fitted structure designed to distribute axial loads, absorb mechanical resonance, and accommodate the unique curvature of oyster shells. Each crate became a mechanical shield, reducing the transmission of vibrational energy into the living tissue inside the shell. The results were counterintuitive. Oysters shipped by truck on longer, warmer routes often arrived in better condition than those flown in state-of-the-art cold chain systems. The reason wasn't temperature, it was vibration. Road transport, despite higher external variability, offered a more forgiving mechanical environment. Less constant resonance, fewer microfractures, more stability in shell structure, even if the cooling precision was marginally lower. In 2022, a comparative shipment from Bordeaux to Singapore brought the issue into sharp relief. Identical oyster crates, identical cooling, identical oxygenation protocols. The only difference, One batch was flown with double-layer vibration isolation, the other without. Upon arrival, mortality in the unprotected batch was 12% higher. No external trauma, no visual cues, just metabolic failure traced to microstructural shell damage. And still, most logistics chains optimize for time and cold. Vibration is rarely mapped. Acoustic profiles are rarely studied. The assumption remains, if it's cold, it's safe. But oysters don't operate on assumptions. They respond to pressure, to resonance, to structural fatigue. A shell can look perfect, and yet, metabolically, the animal inside is already decomposing. The question is not just how far or how fast we can fly seafood. The question is what kind of mechanical environment we are creating during that flight. Because cold is not a shield, speed is not a guarantee, and biology does not care about checklists. It reacts to the journey in full, from the first vibration on the tarmac to the last tilt of the crate at unloading. The oyster's story is written in silence, vibration, and decay, not in delays, not in temperature spikes, but in the fine mechanical echoes we fail to see. When a living oyster is loaded onto an aircraft, it carries with it more than biological value. It carries a logistical hypothesis, an experiment in balance between nature and engineering. Every crate is a controlled environment, yet what happens inside remains deeply unpredictable. That contradiction lies at the heart of modern agribusiness. Because what we see from the outside, temperature gauges, packaging labels, compliance codes, rarely tells us the full story of what's happening within. The oyster's journey forces us to confront this gap. In the world of fresh produce, the oyster is not alone. High-value crops like basil, microgreens, or even strawberries face similar challenges. They remain biologically active after harvest. They continue to respire. They consume oxygen and release gases. They react to vibration and mechanical pressure. They decay, quietly, invisibly, unless the environment around them adapts to these processes. The principle is simple. We are not transporting static goods. We are transporting systems still governed by biology. And biology doesn't pause for logistics. Consider the design of herb transport modules used in long-distance cold chain operations. These aren't just refrigerated boxes. They are mobile ecosystems built to simulate humidity, light exposure, and airflow similar to the plant's original environment. The crates use absorbent substrates, breathable liners, and phase-change cooling materials that respond not just to temperature shifts, but to plant respiration rates. These systems don't fight biology, they follow it. And that is the subtle brilliance the oyster industry is slowly beginning to replicate. In 2021, DHL introduced a sensor upgrade in their Orchid export containers. The innovation wasn't a new cooling technology, it was data. CO2 and O2 sensors calibrated to detect the early signs of respiratory stress. That same principle is now being applied to shellfish shipping, where gas exchange and metabolic rhythm are often more important than the cold itself. What began as a floriculture innovation now informs the seafood supply chain, because in both cases, the problem is the same. How do you keep a living thing alive when the journey itself wants to change it? This isn't a theoretical question, it's an operational one with measurable consequences. A minor shift in oxygen concentration inside a crate, a missed vibration threshold during transit, a container stacked in the wrong part of the cargo hold. These aren't logistical footnotes. They are metabolic decisions. And the cost of getting them wrong can reach into the hundreds of thousands in spoiled inventory. The oyster, with its vulnerability to gas imbalance, acoustic stress, and thermal lag, is simply the most sensitive indicator of a problem far broader in scope. What this reveals is not just a weakness in our systems, but a deeper misunderstanding. The belief that control over time and temperature is enough, that if we track what's easy to measure, we've done our job. But life doesn't respond to metrics. It responds to environment. And the success of any agricultural transport depends on how accurately that environment mirrors what the cargo needs, not what the protocol demands. So the oyster becomes more than a delicacy. It becomes a lesson, a biochemical signal that alerts us to what truly matters inside our logistics networks. Its silence is a language we are only beginning to decode, a language shared by fruits, herbs, flowers, and fish. From tide pool to terminal, its journey forces us to ask, are our systems designed to move things or to sustain them? In the end, industrial agribusiness isn't defined by how fast or how far we can transport perishable cargo. It's defined by how deeply we understand the life inside those containers. And in that understanding lies the next frontier, not of machines or routes, but of respect. Respect for biology, respect for precision, respect for the invisible systems that quietly keep the world alive. Comment 1 if you'd like to see the technology behind biofoam or cold gas sensors in action. The invisible technology behind food isn't just fascinating, it's what keeps the system alive.